Beneath the elegant boulevards and golden facades of Paris, below the hum of cafes and the shimmer of the Seine, lies a second city, one carved into limestone, damp and echoing, a place where time moves differently. In the 18th century, long before tourists lined up to walk through the catacombs, laborers descended into these underground quarries to do the work no one else wanted to see. Their candles quivered in the stale air, illuminating endless corridors of rough-cut stone, dripping water, and the unsettling silence of a world buried alive. It was here, in the 1700s, that workers began discovering something strange, something no one could easily explain. Deep within the darkness lay hundreds of lead-sealed coffins, each heavy, mysterious, and eerily untouched by time. At first, no one understood what they were looking at. The coffins did not resemble the wooden caskets used by ordinary Parisians. They were elegant yet grim, made of thick, hammered sheets of lead, a metal expensive enough to be reserved for the wealthy or important. But there were far too many of them, tucked into alcoves, stacked carefully like books in a library, arranged with a meticulousness that suggested purpose. They were not dumped, they were stored. Even stranger, none had names, dates, or symbols. No heraldry, no religious markings, no engravings to hint at who was inside. They were anonymous, intentionally so, and that made them all the more disturbing. The workers who found them felt a rising unease. Lead coffins were rare. They were used only when a body had to be sealed away to prevent disease or to protect the dead from being disturbed. Yet the limestone tunnels were miles from any known burial ground. These were quarries, not crypts. Why would someone go through the trouble of transporting corpses into the darkest corners of the underground? And more importantly, who were these people, and why had someone wanted them hidden? Rumors spread quickly through the city. Paris in the 1700s was a place of contradictions, glittering aristocratic salons on the surface, poverty and corruption beneath. The coffins fed into an already simmering pot of suspicion. Some whispered that the bodies were victims of a forgotten plague, their deaths concealed to avoid panic. Others speculated that the corpses belonged to political enemies of the crown, people who had vanished quietly, erased from the records, preserved in lead so their identities would remain sealed forever. There was even talk among the superstitious workers that the coffins held alchemists, mystics, or forbidden religious sects who had chosen to be entombed far from consecrated ground. The city officials, upon hearing of the discovery, reacted with discomfort rather than curiosity. They sent inspectors, but their reports were vague and unhelpful. The coffins were noted, counted, briefly studied, and then left undisturbed. The official explanation was that they were simply old burials displaced by quarrying activity, a statement so uninspired that no one truly believed it. Lead coffins were rare even in official cemeteries. Finding hundreds together was unprecedented. But Paris had other problems: overcrowding, disease, famine, debt, and the government preferred mysteries that stayed quiet. In time, the coffins simply became part of the underground landscape. Workers learned to walk past them without lingering, though many refused to work alone in those tunnels. They spoke of strange sounds emanating from the dark, scratches, whispers carried by airflow, odd metallic rings that seemed too regular to be natural. The quarries were already known as dangerous places, prone to collapses and sudden pockets of foul air, but now they had a reputation for being haunted. There were tales of men who went in sober and returned shaken, refusing to talk about what they had heard or seen. As years turned into decades, the city above continued to grow, blissfully unaware of the secrets beneath its feet. By the time the catacombs became an official ossuary in the late 1700s, the lead coffins were already considered relics of a forgotten past. Bones from overcrowded cemeteries were transported into the same tunnels, yet the lead sarcophagi were left untouched, their anonymity preserved even as millions of other remains were rearranged into decorative patterns along the walls. The workers tasked with moving the remains avoided the section where the sealed coffins lay. Even the most hardened among them admitted privately that they felt watched there, as if the dead inside those metal cases wished to stay hidden. It wasn't until the modern era that historians began to study the coffins in detail. Their construction suggested high craftsmanship: lead sheets folded with precision, casing reinforced at the corners, seams sealed tight with molten metal. Whoever placed these coffins underground had resources. That alone implied an organized effort. Yet no records matched their existence. Paris kept meticulous burial records even in turbulent times, but none mentioned mass interment in the quarries. Even during plagues, the city buried victims quickly but openly. Secrecy on this scale was unheard of. Testing on a few accessible coffins only deepened the mystery. When researchers examined the metal exterior, they found no corrosion. Lead, remarkably stable underground, had preserved its shape perfectly. Attempts to scan the contents with non-invasive methods yielded only partial results. The coffins did contain bodies, or what was left of them, but the scans showed odd anomalies, clusters of objects that didn't match typical burial goods. Some contained items that resembled tools, others objects that couldn't be easily identified. But without opening the coffins, which authorities refused to do out of respect for the dead, no one could determine what they were. Speculation flourished. Some historians argued that the coffins belonged to members of a forgotten religious order that practiced secret burials. Others suggested a connection to the early experimental scientists of Paris, men who dabbled in chemistry, medicine, and electricity, whose controversial research might have been hidden in fear of public backlash. Another theory pointed to the tumultuous periods of French history: political purges, palace conspiracies, the quiet elimination of rivals. Lead coffins would preserve bodies indefinitely, preventing identification by decay. They were perfect for making someone disappear, yet remain perfectly intact. One particularly intriguing theory centered on the practice of anatomical research. In the 1700s, anatomy was both celebrated and condemned. Physicians needed bodies to study, but the church frowned on dissection. Could the coffins contain the bodies of individuals used for medical research, hidden to avoid scandal? Supporters of this theory point out that lead coffins were used to transport cadavers discreetly. But hundreds of them? That stretched logic. The most unsettling theory of all came from forensic specialists who examined the size and dimensions of the coffins. A significant number appeared smaller than typical adult burials. Some were child-sized. Paris lost many children to disease in the 1700s, but wealthy families would not bury their young in unmarked lead boxes hidden deep underground. Poor families could never afford such coffins. So who were these children? Why were they sealed away in such expensive containers, far from any cemetery? No one had a satisfying answer. Today, the lead coffins remain exactly where they were first discovered, undisturbed in the silent darkness. Tourists visiting the catacombs do not see them. Their chambers are not part of the public route. Only researchers, quarry workers, and a handful of officials know their exact location. The city prefers to avoid drawing attention to them. Paris is full of mysteries already. The catacombs alone house the bones of 6 million people. But the lead coffins are different. They belong not to the known, documented tragedies of the city, but to an era that left no explanation behind. When modern explorers describe seeing the coffins, they often mention the oppressive stillness surrounding them. The air feels heavier there, colder. It is one thing to walk through tunnels filled with neatly stacked bones, remains moved with purpose and acknowledged by history. It is another to stand before sealed coffins that hold unnamed dead, put there by unknown hands for unknown reasons. Unlike the skull-lined corridors that greet tourists, the lead coffins offer no artistic arrangement, no guiding narrative. They simply exist, silent and heavy, waiting for stories that never come. In a city that has rewritten itself countless times, through revolutions, wars, renaissances, and reinventions, the lead coffins of Paris remain untouched pieces of the past. They are reminders that beneath every beautiful surface lies a layer of secrets, and beneath that, perhaps, another. Paris is often romanticized as the city of light, but it is just as much a city of shadows. And in those shadows lie hundreds of metal caskets, each one a puzzle sealed shut with molten lead, preserving mysteries that may never be solved. Perhaps that is the most haunting part. Cemeteries tell us names, dates, and legacies. These coffins tell us nothing. Their silence is intentional. Their anonymity is absolute. They resist interpretation, defy categorization, and stand as quiet testimony to something, someone, Paris chose to hide. And so the underground city keeps its secret. The lead coffins remain in their stone alcoves, their surfaces cold, their stories locked away. In the stillness, one can almost imagine the faint echo of footsteps from centuries past, the last people who knew why these coffins were brought here, moving through the tunnels with lanterns in hand, leaving behind an enigma that would outlive them all.